right. Yeah. Well, everybody, thank you guys for joining today. We'll still have some people trickling in, but we'll cover some of the, the housekeeping slides, as it were. Thank you for jumping onto the San Diego mug. Today, we're going to be covering a really exciting topic. I think understanding MCP or Model Context Protocol is critical, especially in 2026. And we have Tyron, who's an expert at that, presenting today. This is kind of the one of the many kickoffs for the San Diego mug. We're really trying to revitalize the San Diego mug. So with that in mind, if you are from San Diego, I see at least 2 folks from San Diego. Hey, what's up, Keith? Thanks for jumping on. And then some people outside. But if you are in San Diego, we plan to do more Marketo user groups and then at least one in-person event, hopefully this year as well. So with Summit coming up, that's going to be probably post-Summit. But yeah, with that in mind, we can kind of just go through some of the housekeeping slides and yeah, cover the basics. So high level, no self-promotion or pitching. Obviously, don't contact anyone without their consent. I think Tyron and I are okay with you guys reaching out to us. I'm perfectly fine with that if you have any questions or anything like that. Just make sure that you respect other people from that standpoint. And if a user group member share their use case, let's keep that confidential, right? The goal of this is that we can interact and interface with other folks in the biz, so to speak. So let's try to keep the conversations that we have here confidential. Also, with this meeting itself, it's being recorded. If you don't want to have it recorded, you can drop off and then obviously watch the recording later. We'll be sure to share that out as well, which will be good. But just a heads up, it is recorded. It's going to be shared with Adobe platforms, resources, that kind of thing. And then next up, okay, sorry. There we go. Next up, if you haven't already signed up for the San Diego Marketo user group, be sure to go to mugs.marketo.com/San Diego mug. That's essentially going to be the best place to go in order to find out like what's coming up, what's happening. I don't think we have a LinkedIn group or anything like that, so this will be the place to go. When you sign up, you'll get notifications and updates from the mug when we have new events coming. And obviously, the folks that are joining from other places are also part of those different mugs as well. And then last but not least, we have to make sure to give a big shout out to Adobe Summit. So Adobe Summit is coming up. We're going to be there. Well, Tyron, are you going to be at Adobe Summit? I know I'm going to be there.
Yep, I'm there.
And then a lot of the other folks that are running these mugs are going to be there. Great networking opportunity, lots of fun, lots of swag. Definitely sign up if you haven't already. The time is coming down. But with that, I think that's it for housekeeping, Tyron, if I'm not mistaken. I think everything else is all set. Let's jump into MCP. If you have questions, those kinds of things, be sure to sound off in the Q&A. I'll be monitoring it, and feel free to make notes in the chat as well.
All right, thanks, Kande, and welcome everyone. So we're going to start by going through a quick definition of an MCP with a nice flow diagram to help you visualize what's going on. And we'll see how the Marketo API plays a part in building a Marketo MCP server. And then we'll show you the plug and play template, which requires minimal technical setup that will allow you to hit the ground running and start using a Marketo MCP right away to power AI agents and allow them to have access to your Marketo instance. We're going to be going through how you can test out all the Marketo functions. There's over 40 of them in the template already, so I'll show you how we can test those out very quickly. Then I'll show you 3 different use cases for your Marketo MCP before going into adding new tools if we have the time, and then deploying to production so that you and other members of your team can use the MCP along with any AI agents you have building revenue operations workflows. So Model Context Protocol is just a standard that allows AI agents and LLMs to access and use external data and tools. So no matter whether it's OpenAI, Anthropic, or Ngrok, they will all be able to converse with an MCP server using this protocol. And then it's the job of the MCP server to convert that MCP tool call request into the necessary API request so that the desired action is carried out in the downstream platform. So no matter which platform it is, Marketo, Salesforce, Gmail, you can always set up an MCP server using the MCP protocol that will be able to translate the requests of an AI brain into the desired API requests. And obviously, the Marketo API is involved. And if you haven't come across an API before, it's just an application programming interface. It's a way for 2 or more computer programs to communicate with one another. And in particular, if you haven't dove into the Marketo API docs yet, I've got a blog post here, and you can also search this online. It's the Marketo API Quick Start Guide, which shows you the Marketo API docs, how to create an API user, getting your authentication credentials, and then making your first requests in Postman, and then in Python code within a Zapier workflow. So this should be able to give you a good introduction to the Marketo API ahead of jumping into this. And the template is plug and play, like I mentioned, so you won't necessarily need to know about the Marketo API to use it. But if you do later on want to add new tool functionality to there's a starting 40 tools. If you want to add new tools to that, then you will need to know a little bit about the Marketo API to do that. Okay, so time for our first demo. I want to show you guys how plug and play this template is. So I've got this Replit template here, and I'll just show you how easy it is to get started. So I'm going to save this as private so no one else can see the code that's in here. I'm going to click remix the app.
And Tyron, just for some context as well, because people may not know, can you give a little brief insight on what Replit is?
Yep, I have some slides later on going into Replit and the advantages of it, but it's basically a place where you can host your code so that it's always available and publicly accessible on the internet, so that AI agents or Claude code on your desktop can always access the code that you have running. And I'll show you a little bit later on the advantages of Replit and explain a bit more about what it is then. Okay, so all we have to do is just enter our Marketo secrets, and this will be explained in that blog post I showed you earlier on. So I'm just going to move this off screen for a second while I enter the secrets. So give me a second. You guys can enjoy that lovely nature background. It's like those YouTube ads. Please enjoy the moment of Zen. Okay.
And I can hear birds as well. So I don't know if anyone else can.
There are actual birds in the background. Okay, so I've entered my secrets here off screen, and then all I'm going to do now is click. If we hit this, if we click publish, I'm going to set this off to publish, and then drag that off to the side. Here's the code. So that's going to take a few minutes to load up, but once it's ready, we'll then be able to take the URL and start using it right away. So that might take a few minutes. So let me go back to the slide deck for a little bit, and I'll speak a bit to Replit and the advantages while that's running. So the reason I like using Replit is because it connects to GitHub, and GitHub is a place that allows you to collaborate when you're writing code, and it makes it very easy to make modifications because there's version control. So if you ever make a mistake, you can always revert back to a previous version. So if you're modifying code on your laptop, you can push it to GitHub, it's stored in the cloud, and then you can pull that straight into Replit right away. So I really love how easy it is to go from laptop to GitHub to Replit. And then, as you saw here, deploying code is as easy as clicking a few buttons. I've tried to do this without using Replit before, and it's a real pain even for someone like me who's been programming for, I don't know, probably over 10 years now. So I really recommend Replit as an easy way to host your code once it's ready. So that's still going. So then after this, after we test out and I show you how plug and play this is, we'll be going into testing all the Marketo functions that we have. There's over 40 of them, but I've got a few test scripts that make it really easy, as simple as pressing a button to test every single one of those requests. And in order to be able to test out all the functions and tool calls using these test scripts, you would need to be comfortable with programming with an LLM as your coding partner. And you would need to be familiar with some of the coding terminology, and GitHub for version control and collaboration, like I already mentioned, and then how to deploy your code to production so that you can actually get value from the Marketo MCP server that you built. So you will need to know how to do this if you want to run the test scripts to test out the Marketo functions and MCP tool calls, or if you want to modify, add, or remove any tools from the MCP server. However, as I'll show you, if you just want to use the existing 40 tools, you can literally just come right in here press the button like I showed you, and then you can start using it right away without knowing any programming knowledge. So that's why I call it a plug and play template. So I'm going to copy this URL, and I'm going to go to OpenAI's playground. I'm going to enter my access token. Let's just say Marketo MCP. We're going to connect. So we've got access to all of the 40 MCP tool calls that we have in the Marketo server, from getting lead activities, we've got email content, we've got smart campaign requests as well. So I'm going to go add here. And then to test it out, get me the lead ID for Protorit at tcd.ie. So the reason I love using OpenAI in the playground is that it shows you the exact tool call that it's making every time. And for more complex ones, it will also show you a reasoning. We don't have it here because it was a very simple request, but for more complex requests, it has a reasoning pop-up, which will explain its thought process. And then here it shows you what it's sending to the MCP server and also what it gets back. And what it gets back is not in the most human readable format, but if you are trying to modify things or debug things, it's very useful as a developer. So it's asking me to approve the tool call request here. I'm going to say yes. It's using the get lead by email request, and it's telling me the lead ID is 8713003. So that's how easy it was. We literally just had to come in here, click a few buttons, and now it's deployed. And that's the reason I love Replit. It makes it so easy. And you can start using this template right away to access over 40 different Marketo tools. So that's why I say it's plug and play. But if you do want to make modifications or test out all the Marketo functions before you push it to production, then you will need some programming knowledge. And if you're interested, I do have a Python for RevOps crash course on my website. So you can check that out to learn how to program with an LLM as your coding partner. And I'll go back to presentation mode. So the way we're going to test this out is I've got all the code hosted on GitHub, and we're going to clone that GitHub repository. We're going to get our Marketo credentials. And then you will need an IDE is an integrated development environment. The most popular ones are PyCharm, Visual Studio, or Cursor. So you will need one of these to be able to see the code and run the different test scripts. And you can get versions of these all for free. So don't be worried that there's a pay barrier to enter. You can get all of these for free. But I would recommend, I think Cursor is the best. Cursor's got the best native AI agent, which is built into the right-hand side of the terminal. And it allows you to see all the modifications the AI agent is making to your code, and you can accept or reject them. So I think Cursor is the best interface for that. And I would recommend paying a little bit more and maybe getting your company to pay for it as well if you can, to get the AI agent embedded into your environment. Okay, so now I go back to the second part of the demo. So let's start a new window here. And I'm going to go to the GitHub URL, which will be shared with you guys afterwards. So I'm going to go clone repo. So it's this one here. I'm just going to create it in my downloads for now. So this is the exact same code that is in the Replit template. We just didn't see it in the views I was in Replit. And again, just to show you that this needs very little setup to work, and why I also recommend getting an AI agent. So Cursor's native AI agent works in the right-hand side here in the terminal, but my company turned off our Cursor subscription, and they want us to use Anthropic directly in the terminal. But I recommend using their AI agent, which is in the right-hand side here. But I'm going to do this a different way. So the first thing we need to do is just ask our AI agent to create a virtual environment and install the libraries from the requirements.txt file. So a virtual environment is just, you can think of it like a safe container where everything we install in this container has a limited blast radius. It only affects all the Python scripts that are in this container, because if we install them system-wide, that could cause issues for the rest of the scripts stored in other places on our laptop. And the requirements.txt are all the different libraries that this Marketo MCP server needs. So I'm just asking my AI agent here to create that virtual environment. So I have a safe container to install all these libraries and then install them all. So it's working its way through that. And then once that's ready, I want to show you guys how easy it is to get this running right away. And while that's working, there's one topic I just want to bring up with you guys, which is a tool called Ngrok. It's a tunneling service. So when we're running the MCP server locally on our laptop, it's accessible on our laptop, but if it needs to be accessed on the public internet by OpenAI, Anthropic, or whoever, we need a way to expose the MCP server we're running locally on our laptop to the public internet. And Ngrok is a tunneling service that allows us to do this. So if OpenAI wants to make a tool call request, it goes to an Ngrok URL. And then when Ngrok receives the MCP tool call, it forwards it to our MCP server locally on our laptop. So that's why we use Ngrok, and I'll show you how it's used in a second. So let's go back here. Okay, so that was created. And then the one we're going to run here is just our MCP server. So let's get that running. So that's running right away. And then we need a separate terminal. And again, this may seem complicated if you're not new to programming or working with an LLM as your coding partner, but even if you went to like Claude Chat, OpenAI Chat, it would be able to walk you through these steps to help you get set up and started. If you just gave it the GitHub URL, which I cloned a few minutes ago, if you gave it that and ask it, how do I set up this project in PyCharm, Cursor, or Visual Studios, it will walk you through the steps I'm doing now. And I just want to also show you this quickly, because there's a very detailed README file in this GitHub repository, and any AI agent you give this repository to will be able to read this README and understand how to set up the template and get it working. So whether that's the native AI agent you have within your integrated development environment, or whether it's in Claude Chat here, they'll all be able to read this, see how to set it up, and then see all the different tool calls that are available. Okay, so we've got our MCP server running. And that is this part down here running locally on our laptop. So now we need to set up our tunneling service. So I'm going to go Ngrok HTTP 8000. So now I'm going to copy this URL. So our MCP server is running locally on port 8000. So whenever Ngrok receives a request to this URL, it's going to forward it to port 8000 on our laptop. And I just want to show you how quickly this is to get working. Let's go connectors, and then we're going to go add a custom connector, name, Marketo MCP. And then we have to do the /MCP. So now, whenever Anthropic sends it to this particular URL, Ngrok is going to forward it to port 8000, where our MCP server here is listening. So if we go back to our Marketo MCP here, we can see the exact same tool calls that we saw in OpenAI a minute ago. And you can set them all to either needs approval or always allow, or you can customize them. You can block some of them, you can accept some of them. So maybe for all the read ones, you'll have all the read ones like browsing, getting, you'll have all of those as always allow, but for all of the creation ones, like maybe deleting a token, deleting a smart campaign, you'd have those as needs approval first. And then to start using this, it's as simple as going to the connectors, making sure Marketo MCP is enabled, and then go, please find me the ID for Pretoris at tcd.ie. And I've set it equal to always allow, so it shouldn't ask me for permission here. Whoop. Okay, so we got an error there. Great. In my live demo. I love that. Okay, that's interesting. I just tested it out like half an hour ago, but I can take a look at that off screen and see what's going on. But oh, the reason for this, actually, that's my fault, is we need to put in our Marketo API credentials. We haven't done that here. And this is what it looks like to get this running. We're going to have an MCP API key so that we know the permission, so that you saw an OpenAI earlier on where I entered that key. This is so we can lock it down so that no one else can access our Marketo MCP tool, because if it's just a URL and someone else gains access to that URL, anyone would be able to make tool call requests to your Marketo instance. So that's why we have this key here as a bit of security. So again, I'm going to go off screen for a second and enter those credentials. So enjoy the brief moment of Zen while I do that quickly.
Yeah, Tyron, we have a couple of questions that came through. I'm guessing we'll hold them, but I wanted to just to make sure I don't interrupt your pacing.
Okay. What time is it? Are they? Do you think it's a blocker to people understanding as we move forward, or? Oops,
yeah, I think
showed all those.
There were two things. So initially, you had kind of shown open APIs being an option for which it sounds like you can use any LLM, and we're tapping into Claude as well for different parts of this. That was from Joe Pham, which I think is probably fine, but just wanted to confirm from your side, using any LLM throughout this process is okay, or is there ones that you recommend for different stages?
You can use any one you want. So I was just showing OpenAI in the playground there because I really love those previews you get of how it's making the tool call, what it receives back from Marketo, and sometimes it'll also show you the reasoning. So this Marketo MCP server can be used with any AI brain, no matter what the provider.
And then the follow-up question, and I think this will be a good level set for everyone. This conversation around the MCP is to set up an environment where you can query Marketo directly, leveraging an LLM to act on those action items, whether that's retrieving a lead ID, maybe looking at a past activity, those kinds of things. Is that kind of the general theme of what's being built?
Yeah, we're just building the translation layer basically, and I'll show you. I won't go too in depth into the code or how it works, but we're just building this layer that translates the tool call request from an AI agent into a Marketo API request. And the advantage of doing this is that with AI agents, you can talk to them in natural language and say, please find me the ID for Pretora tcd.ie. And it will understand naturally which of the tool calls it needs to use. So it's very good for natural language instructions. And then you can imagine if we gave it a webinar program brief, or we gave it an email build brief, and we gave it some instructions beforehand, like this is how we do it at our company, this is the template we clone for webinars, this is the template we clone for emails, then you can give it that, that document of the brief, and then say, please build out the program for me, and it will know the necessary tool calls it needs to make to do that.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's spot on. So yeah, Joe and Sarah, we just covered those questions. Thank you guys for asking that.
So this now worked once I had I accidentally showed those on screen for a little bit. So I'll have to delete those because obviously I'll just mention this here, your Marketo API credentials are like the keys and castle to your instance. If anyone gets access to those, then they can carry out any API requests in your Marketo instance. So you should never share those online publicly. So I'm going to have to delete all of those after this. But that's how we get it working very easily. And again, plug and play. I've tried to make this as simple as possible. And now I'll just show you a bit about how it's set up and how the MCP server is set up to be a translator. In the Marketo functions.py here, we pull in all our Marketo secrets, first of all. Then we've got this function to get our access token with those secrets. And this access token then gives us the permission to make subsequent API requests. And then we've got all our functions for activities. We've got ones for leads. We've got our email functions, and they're all defined here. So these carry out the API requests necessary to do the actions in Marketo. And then all the MCP server.py does is it puts an MCP wrapper around those Marketo functions. We import, it's a library called fast MCP. And you'll notice that all it's doing is just putting like a function around the Marketo function. So all this is doing is calling the get activity types Marketo function, which is defined in here. So it's just a simple wrapper. That's all this does. It calls this at mcp.tool. It forms like a little bit of a wrapper function with a description, so the AI agent knows when to use the function or the tool call, and then it just calls the corresponding Marketo function. So that's why I call this a translator. The MCP server is literally, it's got all the MCP tools defined, and all it's going to do is call the Marketo functions to make the necessary API request. And next, I want to show you how easy it is. I've got these two scripts, test MCP server.py and test Marketo functions.py. So we're going to start by testing all the Marketo functions first, because I want to make sure that every single one of these works correctly before we try and access them through the MCP server, because the MCP server is obviously a layer on top and adds a little bit of abstraction. So before testing all of this, I want to test all the Marketo functions directly first to make sure there are no issues. And then once I've tested all these functions, I know they work, then I'm going to test all the corresponding MCP tool calls. And before we dive into testing, we will need some test assets in Marketo. We'll need a test folder, a test email program. And for this email program, we're going to attach an email, and we're going to make sure that the send time is sometime in the future, because we've got one of the tests to schedule out an email program, and this would return an error if this date were in the past. So just make sure that the scheduled date is sometime in the future. We've got a test batch campaign, and these are all very simple. They don't need to be complex. I've just put in like a personal email address here that I know is safe to use. And then the flow is just going to increase the score by 5 points. So it's very simple, and there's very little that could go wrong. We've got our test email. We've got a test request campaign, which is set up very similarly. And we need to turn this on for the test to be successful, because one of the tests will request this requestable campaign. So we need it to be on in order for that test to succeed. And then we've got a test trigger campaign, and one of the tests will turn this on and off. And again, it's set up very simply. So we need these test assets created ahead of time before we run the tests. And then let's go to test Marketo functions.py. We're going to run this in its own dedicated terminal. And we've got three different options. We've got read-only tests, write-only tests, or full tests. So the full test is obviously a combination of both. So let's start with all the read tests. So it's getting our token. We can see there's 102 different activity types in my Marketo instance. There's 1,589 fields in my Marketo instance. It's found 20 emails by browsing. Yeah, so it's just going to pop through all those retests one by one. And now it's asking me for a test email address. And it's going to try and get the activities for this person and some information about them. So it's going to run through all of these. It might take some time to find the activities, because depending on how much activity the lead has, and depending on how far back you look, whether it's 7 days or 30 days, it could take a while to retrieve all of that via the API. So that's probably why it's taking a little bit here. And while we're waiting for that, I just want to explain the difference between these two. The only difference between these two scripts is that the auth.py has the authentication attached to it, where you have to enter the MCP API key in order to access the MCP server. But other than that, these two are the exact same scripts, basically. It's just that this one has that authentication added. Okay, so we can see that all of our tests succeeded here, all 23 of them. So let's go and do a write test now. So I'm going to restart it. And I just want to point out here that whenever we run these tests and we enter a variable for testing, like the email address, they get stored in this test config.json. So if we were to rerun the test, it won't ask us again to enter the same test email address because it's already stored. So let's do 2 here. So we're going to do all the write tests now. So it's asking me for the folder name, which is MCP test email program, test batch campaign. Okay. Create MCP. I better make sure this is correct. MCP test folder. So bear with me here. I'm going to have to type these out. MCP test folder. It's found it, and it's found the corresponding ID, and you can see that got stored here. And then it's, what's it looking for next? And it's asking us what program type do we want to be created. So we're going to create a program in one of these tests later. So I'm just going to say I want to create a default program. You can again see that stored, and it's now pulling up all the available channels I have in my Marketo instance. And obviously the program type and the channels much match, because channels only exist within certain program types. So default, I'm just going to go operational, if that's there. Yeah, operational for the channel type associated with my default program. It wants a trigger campaign name for activating, deactivating, which is just MCP test trigger campaign. Test trigger campaign. It's finding that, store the ID, batch campaign, MCP test batch campaign. And then the request, MCP test request campaign. Test request campaign. And it's asking me the lead email for request campaign test. So this is the email address that it's going to request the campaign for. And the email program name is just MCP test email program. Okay, and now you can see it's running through them. If we go to Marketo, we'll see it create these assets one by one, or like turn on and off the smart campaign. It's actually pretty quick at doing it all. Has it done? Okay, schedule the batch campaign. So I'll say yes. We see that get scheduled. Let's test batch campaign. Should schedule it for 5 minutes in the future. We can see that's now turned on. If we go to schedule, schedule runs 1:38 p.m. Central District Time. And then it's asking me,
are these activities that are coming through the MCP, will they show up in the audit log for Marketo?
If you request a campaign on a lead, for example, or you mean they'll show up. I haven't used the audit log before, but I'm guessing they'd show up under the API user that's
Gotcha.
you've got the credentials for.
Very cool. Okay, just curious about that, because I noticed the at the campaign summary level, it just showed that you had been the last person to edit it, on February 17th. I was just curious to know if it would also reflect if that smart campaign had been edited. I don't think the schedule would impact it though.
Yeah, I think it usually says the MCP, if it's scheduled by the API, it'll say the API user usually. Mm-hmm. So I can test that. Or it's change used by membership trend, view all ones. Okay, I can't find that at the moment, but usually if you're looking at the audit logs, it'll be the API user, which is associated with these credentials that will be associated with the changes.
Okay, very cool.
Okay, so we'll trigger the request campaign for the lead. Okay, that's succeeded. It's creating the MCP test program down here. It's cloned one of the programs, so it tested out that functionality. And then the cool thing about this is it can clean up the mess very easily. So it created 5 assets during the test here. And if we want to clean those up for the next test, we can just go, I want to transition quickly so we can see it do it, but it'll clean those all up one by one. And that's it. So all of our write tests were successful now. And the great thing is, as I mentioned, it stores all of our test variables. So the next time we want to run, let's just say we do the full test this time, it can run through each and every single one of these on its own because it has all the test parameters necessary. We don't need to implement them this time. So now we've tested out all the Marketo functions. We know our authentication works. The next thing we're going to do is test the next level up. We want to test that we can access all this Marketo functionality through the MCP server. And the way we're going to do that is we need to have our MCP server running first of all. And we do have it running in this script the same as before. And then I'm going to start a new terminal for this. I just want to wait for these tests to complete, schedule the batch campaign to run. So you can notice here that it's It's loaded all the testing variables from this file. It's not asking them for me. It's not asking me for them again. So I'm just going to control this because I think you guys get the idea. I'm going to kill that. So we've got our MCP server running now. So now I want to test making all of those exact same 40 requests through the MCP server now, because I know all the underlying Marketo functions that they map to work correctly. And since we already have all these parameters, if I do a full test here, it's just going to proceed on its own and use all the test parameters to test them through the MCP server. And if we go here, this will update each time. It's just saying 200 means okay. So for all these requests that are being made here through the MCP server, we're getting successful responses, which is good. So this will hopefully complete without any issues, and that's how we know our MCP server is good to go and ready to use. So while that's still running, I'm going to jump back to the slide deck quickly. And go back to deploying to production. So you guys might be wondering, okay, so if we've got it working locally on our laptop here using Ngrok as our middleman, why do we need to host in Replit? Why can't we just keep running it on our laptop like this? And the reason for that is because, oops, if your laptop gets turned off, then the MCP server running locally gets disconnected from the internet. If your laptop loses connection to the internet, then any AI agents you have connected to your MCP server will obviously also become disconnected. And if you have the free version of Ngrok, each time you restart Ngrok, the forwarding URL will change. So then you'll have to update the URL that we're using in OpenAI and Anthropic. So each time you restart this is going to be URL, unless you get the paid version. If you get the paid version, then you'll get a consistent one each time. But if you're just using this for free, every time you restart, this changes. So then you'd have to go back to OpenAI and you'd have to create a new MCP server pointing to the new URL. Or if you're in Claude, settings, connectors, or if you're in Claude, you'd have to modify, configure. You can't actually, yeah, you just have to delete this one if the URL changed and then make a new one. So those are the reasons why, sorry, I've got these all over the place. Those are the reasons why you'd want to transition to publishing this somewhere like Replit. There are other providers like AWS, but they're more difficult to host your code with. Replit is like the marketing ops friendly version. It handles a lot of the stuff on the back end for you. And that's why I really like Replit. It makes it easy to sync from your laptop to GitHub and then pull in the code from GitHub into Replit. And it's easy to deploy code by clicking a few buttons like I showed you earlier on. Okay, and now I want to go through some use cases. So we can see that, did all our tests finish here? I'm not scheduling the batch campaign to run. Okay. Schedule trigger campaign. Okay, so this is going to go through the rest of them, but I just want to show you some use cases now. And I've already touched on some of them before. Delete all for the test assets. Go yes, that's fine. So what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this URL again for our MCP server. And we're going to go over to Claude. And same as before, we're going to add our custom connector, Marketo server, Marketo MCP, and then put the URL. And one thing to make this a really useful Marketo assistant is in capabilities here, and I really recommend downloading Claude on your laptop. Cowork is especially powerful when you've got longer tasks and you needed to break it down into phases. And then if you're doing any sort of coding, Claude Code is amazing. I can access all the files on your laptop and modify them directly. So I really like the desktop version of this. And if you go to capabilities, what will make this a really powerful Marketo personal assistant for you to help with all your campaign operations, data extraction, and data analysis is this generate memory from chat history. make sure that's enabled, because if you give it feedback and you say, hey, every time we have a webinar program, this is the program we need to clone. If you wanted to remember that for future, then you need to have this toggled on. So if we start a new chat and we make sure our MCP server is connected, we can ask it something more complex like, what are the channels in my Marketo instance? And obviously, like I mentioned before, this is a very simple use case, but if you gave it any sort of a doc, like an email build document or a webinar document, and you've trained it before and given it instructions, then it'll be able to carry out and build that email or webinar program for you. And you can just sit back and you can either give it the control it needs and allow it to do everything on its own, maybe over time, once it's gained your trust. But initially, you can maybe, like I said before, whoops, wrong one, configure. You can set all the reading to always allow, and then you can set things like cloning or creating tokens, any of the creation or updates or deletes, you can set those to be needs approval. So then when you're here in the chat, you'll have to monitor it as it goes by and give it the approval it needs. And then once you gain confidence over time, you can just set it to always allow, and then it can build out all your campaigns for you and also do data extraction or analysis. So that's one use case, is building a personal assistant in Marketo in your Claude desktop version. The next, which I showed you earlier on, is when you connect your MCP server here in OpenAI. And when you're in the playground here, you can obviously choose what model you want. You can also connect other tools, like you can give it access to a knowledge base. So if you wanted to build like an MCP scoring, sorry, not MCP, an ICP, ideal customer profile scoring MQL mechanism, you can give it a knowledge base of what your ideal customer profiles look like, and then it can reference those when it's making its scoring decision. Or you can always get it to do web search. So if you're building an email generation agent, for example, and you say, you could have something in the prompt to say, always use the web search tool to find relevant news about the company when you're writing the email. So then the email generator could say something like, hey, Rob, I see your company just raised, 50 million in Series C funding. Would love to chat to you about X, Y, or Z. So you can attach all these different tools here in OpenAI, along with the system prompt you want it to carry out. And then you can use this to build things like an advanced duplicate merging in Marketo. I have a blog post from years ago where I just used Python rules to determine which values should be the winners when there's a discrepancy. So if it's lead source, prioritize paid search above organic, for example. I hard coded all of those as rules in Python, but now you could instruct an agent here in OpenAI in plain language how to merge two people and deal with discrepancies in field values. So you could build a smarter lead merger, you could build MCP scoring, or you could build like email generation for your emails in Marketo. And then the way you'd access this agent is either using like webhooks in Marketo or a self-service flow step. And then the final use case I wanted to show you guys is something I built, which is using MCP, slideshow, where we have a listener server, which allows people to interact with an AI agent from Slack. And this listener server, it forwards messages from the user to the brain and vice versa. And then it's up to the brain to decide, okay, do I need to carry out a tool call? Do I need more information from the user? Or do I just need to confirm that I've taken some actions? And if it needs to make a tool call, it's going to go to its MCP server and it can look up information about a lead in Marketo. It can assign ownership in Salesforce, and it can also send an email to the person. And I use this to build an MQL triaging agent. So when it's asked, like, why did this lead MQL? This is a great thing about AI. It will know from that sentence, it will process a natural language and say, okay, for MQL, activity is usually important. Also, there could be field values that are important, and you'd instruct it on what's important in like the prompt you define here. But in this example, it's answering the question by looking at the person's activity, and it's pulling in all the web page views. And then because it has access to also Salesforce and Gmail, if one of your sales team sees this and they ask, whoops, and they say, okay, why did this lead MQL? And they get the answer to that question, they can say, please assign this lead to me in Salesforce, and then please send them an email. And then the AI agent will use the Salesforce and Gmail tools that it has to carry out that functionality. And if you're interested in learning more about this particular example and MCPs, I show you exactly how to build that in the AI for RevOps course. So you can check that out if you're interested. And then how are we doing on time? I can either take questions if there are a lot of them. I might stop for questions, and then if we hit like a stagnation in questions, I can go through adding new tools to the MCP server.
Yeah, we have Katie Rodriguez asked two questions that I think are valuable, and then we have a couple others that are pretty good.
Okay.
But I wanted to make sure I got to her. So Katie Rodriguez asked, when you set up an environment in the IDE, is that a one-time setup, or do you have to do that every time? I think you answered that regarding Ngrok, and essentially if you have the free version, if it's going to be local on your laptop. Is that right? I want to make sure, because I think I'm understanding this as well, but I don't want to misspeak.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to find that window again. So once you set up the MCP server in this project, sorry, not the MCP server. Once you set up the virtual environment, you only need to do that once within a project. Once that's set up, you can install whatever libraries you want in that virtual environment. So that's once only. The only thing that might change from this is so you'll notice that this is like 204.48. If I like turn this off and then turn it back on, it's a different URL this time. I think I'm almost sure that URL changes every time because I've tested it before and had to change it. So that's the only thing that could change, is that if you do restart it and you're doing testing locally on your laptop, then you just need to copy a different URL when you're going into Claude or you're going into OpenAI. And that's why it's better to host it in Replit, like I said, because if you want this to be production ready and usable by your RevOps workflows or AI agents, then you do need it hosted somewhere like Replit.
Now, and for Ngrok, and her follow-up question ties into that. This is purely for just testing the functions of the server. Is that correct?
Yep. Okay. Yeah. So it's just a way for us to test locally. And with Claude Desktop, what's annoying, unfortunately, is I couldn't get with my server, and I tried for a while. I couldn't get the ability to, let's go add a custom connector. I couldn't get the OAuth client ID and client secret to work with my MCP template. And I did try very hard. So someone who's maybe better than me at programming could try, but that's why if you're testing locally, you can use this here and put that straight into Claude, so long as you don't share the URL with anyone.
Okay.
So that's where you kind of use this. If you're just testing locally on your laptop and you just want to connect it to Claude here, you can use it. But as soon as you want to start using it in production workflows, then I'd host it on Replit instead. This is kind of just for testing. And if you, let's say later on, you add a new tool call, you add a new Marketo function and a new corresponding tool call, and you want to test it again using these scripts, then you can run them. So this is kind of just for testing and maybe for using with Claude. But you can also, once you host in Replit, you can also use that here with Claude. So
awesome. One question for Jeff, which I think is an easy yes, but he did ask if a platform or another marketing automation tool, whatever it might be, has exposed APIs and documentation, this same process should be able to be applied across the board.
Absolutely, yeah. So what I show you here with defining your functions, you can use the exact same process. Once you define the functions to make the API requests, all you need to do is just put them in a simple wrapper like this using the same library, and then it will work. And that's exactly how I built that MQL example I was showing you. Each of these is just the exact same setup. I've just got a separate Salesforce function script, and I've got a separate Gmail function script. And then the MCP server just has wrappers around all of those functions. So yeah, you can use the exact same template here.
Awesome. And then Stephen Hills asked, is there a feature that or a level of functionality that you're using right now with this MCP server that you find indispensable, that you can't live without, essentially? And I like the idea of an assistant, but maybe a use case where, assigning the lead to me could be really powerful. I could see for sales or something to that effect.
Yeah. With the MCP server at the moment in our company, we use it for a lot of debugging, where we're meant to get handoffs to like salespeople or our AI agent in Salesforce, but they don't happen. So then we ask our AI agent, hey, can you please look into this to see what happens? And then it checks the handoff fields to see if they're populated in Marketo. And if everything looks good in Marketo, it then also has access to a Salesforce MCP. And it can check in Salesforce to see if the necessary fields were populated, and helps us with debugging. I haven't yet integrated into things like merging. I've been mostly building like an AI salesperson the past 2 years, but in this, and we'll share this with you guys afterwards, but I've got a blog post going through everything I went through today, and there's like an 1 and 7-minute YouTube video going into it all.
Okay.
But down the bottom here, I do link to like a lead scoring Bible and an automated merging, the one I was telling you about before. And you can look at these blog posts, but then you can see how you can maybe modify them to bring AI intelligence into them. Because as I mentioned, this merging is just hard-coded Python rules, but maybe you want an AI agent who can be a bit more flexible and instead understand natural language. And you can do the same with like lead scoring as well, obviously.
Yeah. And then probably the last question, 'cause I think this is valid to go through. Gopinath and Keith also kind of asked more or less the same question, but when it comes to permission settings, do you need different MCP servers to accommodate role-based access across ops, analytics, users, that kind of thing? And how do you, if so, how, if not, or if so, how do you manage that access, right? The ability for me to be able to ask, Marketo to do something.
That's a great question. Something I haven't considered. You might be able to expose different endpoints. So here we've only got a single endpoint, like the /MCP that you see here. Like it's on local port 8000 /MCP, but you could set up different endpoints here. So you could have like a data analytics endpoint which only has access to read functionality. And then if it's like an email editing person, you could have like a /email, and then that has all the email functions. And then you could have different credentials associated with each one, like you could have different MCP API key for each one. So you could have MCP API key, like data analytics, MCP API key, email programs, whatever. And then I think the best way to do it might be to have a different endpoint for each one of those different not job titles, but permission roles. And again, like it sounds complicated to set up, but you could ask Claude. I could probably ask it here, like, hey, Claude, could you please set up different endpoints for data analytics and email programs? And it would do that for me, like I'd say in under 5 minutes, and have like different keys for each one.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a valid question. Maybe something that we can consider a little bit later. But that's it for questions. Really good questions, folks. And then, yeah, I think we got 6 minutes left. We can make something happen.
Okay, I'll be quick here. So Marketo API docs. So if you guys were wondering, okay, I want to add a new tool to the API endpoint, how do I go about doing that? So the first starting place is the Marketo API docs. And then let's say we want to clone an email. Geez, these are slow. So let's go to emails, and then I'm looking for clone email. And then I can literally just take this, and the way I recommend doing it is just asking your AI assistant. So, whoops, yeah, this is the right one. So then I'm going to say, please create a new Marketo function and a corresponding MCP tool call. And then it'll have it added. Might be a little bit slow getting started. It'll take some time to digest it, but that's all you have to do. And like, I rarely code by myself anymore. I always go through Claude to do it. So I recommend that even if you're not familiar with coding, it's even easier nowadays, because even this, you'd use the same approach as a developer who's been programming for 20 years. Like everyone's using AI now to program. So you'd be at the kind of same level as someone else, but you just might not know some of the terminology yet. But if you work with AI, it'll be able to teach you all of that stuff. So that's how easy it is if you do want to add a new Marketo tool to the MCP server. So yeah, that's everything I have to share today. If you have any questions, like I mentioned, this blog post, you can find it if you go to my website, theworkflowpro.com. It's Marketo MCP in 15. It's right at the top. And yeah, you can watch a YouTube video, and I link to the GitHub repository and the Replit template here. So the GitHub repo is here, and then the Replit Replit template is also here that you can clone and start getting. You can clone and get started right away. Okay. Any final questions? I might just go to this.
We got one that came in. Keith asked a follow-up question. Did you build every API call into the MCP?
No. Well, you mean like me, like with my hands, or code?
I'm guessing probably with code.
So what I did was shout out to. Oh, this is cool. I'll answer the question first and then show you. So what's that company's name called? Inflection had a good starting point. So I just cloned their GitHub repository, and then I kind of separated it out because they kind of had it all in one script, but I broke it out into Marketo functions and a separate MCP server. And I just asked AI, I gave it the Inflection one. I said, hey, please create a separate Marketo functions. Please create a separate MCP server. And then I added all the test scripts here to make it a lot easier to test. So I built on the shoulder of giants. I didn't start from scratch. I cloned theirs and then made some modifications. And I just want to show you, so you can see it's asking me for permission now to make the change to add this clone email function to the Marketo function. So I'm going to go yes. And then it's going to ask me now to make the same change in both of these scripts, the MCP server and the MCP server auth.py. So yeah, now it's asking me to add the corresponding tool call to MCP server. I'm going to say yes. And then it's going to be the same thing with the MCP server auth. It's going to have to add it there as well. Okay. So that's how easy it is to add new tools. Or if you want to remove one, it's as simple as like just deleting the corresponding function and tool call from the server. And you can ask your AI agent to do that. Or since it's deleting, it's a lot easier for us just to manually copy and then delete. All right. Any final questions?
Doesn't look like we have any, but thank you guys so much for joining us today. Tyron crushed it as usual. Again, be sure to sign up for the San Diego mug. Go to that page. We'll see you at Adobe Summit, and happy St. Patty's Day.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.